Hello everyone, happy Friday to you all. As you can see, today's notes are a little bit different than what we've been taking the past 2.5 weeks. We are starting chapter 11, all right, the High and Late Middle Ages. You do not have any homework over the weekend, so relax, get some fresh air, do some activities around the house, help mom and dad out around the house, either with yard work or cleaning, organizing, whatever you guys kind of have planned going on at home, or maybe help your siblings out with a project or activity. And definitely, take some time for prayer on Sunday as well. Try and watch the Mass televised by Kellenberg. So if you can download those notes that I put in Schoology last night and have them out, all right, because we are going to cover the first 3 slides of Chapter 11, which is going to talk about the High and the Late Middle Ages. Monday we will conference. You don't have any other homework. Just make sure by 3 p.m. today you could submit your Chapter 10 Section 3 worksheet and then your Chapter 10 notes. I want to see your notes filled in from Chapter 10, so please make sure you submit those by 3 p.m. today. You will lose points if you do not submit those. All right, that is a homework grade, all right, for this note, or a classwork grade, and it gives me an idea of who is paying attention and whatnot. So let us begin. All right, Chapter 11, we're going to talk about the High and the Late Middle Ages. So this is roughly from the year 1000 to the year 1200. Right, we talked about the early Middle Ages, which is pretty much up to, the year 900. Right, with this breakup of Charlemagne's empire. And the first thing we're going to talk about in Section 1 is feudalism. All right, now feudalism is a system that comes into effect, and it began during the days of Charlemagne's empire, but it really became more and more part of European lifestyle during the High and the Late Middle Ages, around the year 1000. Okay, and feudalism came about because there was a weak central government. There was a loss of a strong central government after the collapse of Charlemagne's empire, and all of the nobles, such as counts or mayors or the majordomos, started to increase their power, and these nobles created a government to protect their property called feudalism. All right, and feudalism was a political system as well as an economic system. Okay, the definition for feudalism is a social system, okay, where land-owning nobles govern and protect people in return for services. For example, imagine that you live in an area where there are several hills, and the people live in great fear. The people in that area live in great fear of what the people on the next hill might do to them. They are hungry, tired, so they find a leader. And they promise that leader, if he will protect them, they will serve him for the rest of their lives. So imagine, like Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Page, Mrs. Villani, and myself on a hill. Then on another hill, there's 7th grade teachers. Another hill, the 8th grade teachers. Okay, and the 6th grade teachers choose a leader. Let's say we pick Mrs. Page, and we ask for Mrs. Page to protect us, and we will serve her for whatever service she needs us to do to help our hill function and survive. All right, and we do not travel beyond that hill because we're suspicious of outsiders, the 7th grade teachers, the 8th grade teachers, strangers trying to find a way to attack us. A few merchants come up to sell goods to us, but there's very little people coming up to our hill. All right, that is like an example of what feudalism would be. Okay, and some services that people would promise nobles is 1, fighting in a noble's army, and 2, farming land, because they needed to provide food for the people within, the land. us sixth grade teachers would need to provide food for ourselves if we live on a hill. So therefore, Mrs. Villani, myself, Mr. Brennan, we would have to be farmers, and we would have to give a portion of our food over to Mrs. Page because she is working hard to make sure we are well fortified and protected. Okay, and that is like just a small example of what feudalism would be. Right? And this was the way of life all throughout Europe during the High and Late Middle Ages. I'll leave this slide up for a little bit, let you guys copy down some notes. You can always pause it, and then once you have the notes copied down, move on to the next slide. So in this system, society was kind of divided into groups. You have the nobles and knights, okay, which are the people that kind of protect everyone on a fiefdom or on a hill or a territory. Then there's a clergy, all right, there was religious leaders. All right, clergy are religious leaders that taught Christianity because that is still a big part of society in Europe. And then there are peasants and townspeople, which made up 90% of the population. So most of the people back then, all right, were townspeople. Okay, and they farm the land and provide services such as, whether it's making lumber, blacksmiths, coopers. Those are people that make like storage barrels back in the Middle Ages. Butchers, bakers, and so forth. All right, so there's three large groups that people would kind of fall in. Nobles and knights, those are the ones who fought. They're at the top of society. Then the clergy, and peasants and townspeople. And people, all right, so people born had fixed places in society. For example, you think of the sixth grade teachers on that hill. All right, Mrs. Page, all of her children would be considered nobles, all right, because she is at the top of society. She is the leader. She is responsible for protecting Mrs. Villani, myself, and Mr. Brennan. All right, and Mrs. Villani, myself, and Mr. Brennan, our children, would be considered townspeople or peasants. All right, because we are living a life of serving Mrs. Page in return for her protection. So once you are born into that social position, there is very little chance of moving beyond it. Right? Townspeople and peasants very rarely had children that would go on to become knights or nobles. Right? That was unheard of. It was very rare circumstance. Are there, some instances where it did happen? Yes, but it is very rare. So the social and political system of feudalism really kind of confined people into fixed places in society, and this aspect of life in Europe is going to also give influence to Europeans to head to the Americas in the 1500s, because in Europe it was very difficult to move up in society if you were a peasant or a townsperson. Even today it could still be difficult. All right, here in the United States, as well. There's more opportunities in the United States, but it could be difficult in Europe. I'll leave this slide up for a couple more seconds. Make sure you get everything down. You can see an image of a knight. We'll talk about knighthood and knights during the High and Late Middle Ages a little bit later. We have Charles Martel to kind of give credit for starting that class of society. All right, knights. So just to kind of break down the three groups more, at the top of a feudal society was a king. Every fief or territory, all right, would have a king, and the king had the power to grant fiefs. All right, fiefs are lands. That you heard me say that term before. All right, a fief is land. So imagine, there being a king of, let's say, Massapequa. Okay. And in Massapequa, for those that live in Massapequa or any other town, there are smaller pieces of property that people own for business, for living, for working out, whatever the case may be, schools. All right, the king is the one that could give out land to people to either have a business, such as like a bakery or a butcher shop or a blacksmith shop or a carpenter shop or a home. And people that would receive a large property that would be considered like a mansion, like imagine someone in Massapequa that has a huge house, an acre of land, that person would be considered like a lord in the Middle Ages, right? And some lords would act independently from the king and divide their large acre land into smaller territories, all right, and they would divide their fief among vassals, which are lesser lords. Okay, and vassals sometimes would divide their territory, among knights or mounted warriors. Right, but each knight and vassal was required to pay homage to a lord. All right, a knight or a vassal had to pay homage. What that meant is that they had to basically promise in front of a large crowd and pay respect to that lord. Basically, genuflect, kneel down, and swear upon his life and his family that he would serve the Lord or serve the king. And that ceremony of homage, a big thing under that was loyalty. Right? And all of the people in these groups were considered nobles. So vassals are nobles, lords are nobles, kings are nobles, and knights would be considered nobles. And at the bottom of society, as we talked about in the previous slide, would be townspeople and peasants, and they basically owed the Lord service in exchange for his protection. And if a lord failed to protect, then the peasants and townspeople and some fiefs, they could protest to the Lord if they had one, or the king if they did not have a lord, and ask for the help of someone strong enough to oppose him and protect them and to be their new lord and protector. Okay, so wars were very common. We'll be talking a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. All right, so make sure you get all of this down. This is the last slide for today. Again, you don't have any homework over the weekend. Make sure you submit your Chapter 10 notes to me and get the Chapter 10 Section 3 worksheet to me. And I hope all of you have a great weekend. I look forward to conferencing with you guys on Monday. Thank you, and have a great day.